A while back. Usually I'm cold, and so I'm hot, and so I want it cold. The guy who was speaking and teaching us must live in a freezer because it was unbelievably cold. I mean, there wasn't a person in the room that wasn't shivering through the entire thing. Usually there's kind of a balance. So there's some people here who are cold and some people who are warm. But in that particular room, he literally had all of us freezing to death. And it's one of those things, I guess, he was sweating. That was the other thing that was really wild to me. Probably some health condition that was undiagnosed at this point is what I kind of thought. But anyway, let me get started. For those of you who don't already know me, I'm Leigh Hilton. Our firm has helped over 6,000 families protect the assets that they leave to their loved ones from divorce, creditors, and lawsuits. And that's usually what resonates most with my clients, is making sure that what you leave behind is protected. I've also helped over 300 families implement the plans that we've designed after the loved one has passed away. And the reason why that's significant to you is most people, when they do a will or a trust, it's kind of a depressing thing to talk about. So we're talking about if you die, who gets your stuff, which is what the speech is about today. But I'm also talking to you about if you become disabled, who's going to handle your finances for you? How are things going to be done? So most likely, most of my clients and most of other attorneys' clients, when you get done having that depressing conversation and you actually get the documents home, you're going to put them on a shelf or you're going to put them in your safe deposit box and you're going to totally forget about them. But what you really want is for them to work when they're needed and not have your family discover that when they're actually trying to use them, that there's something missing in those documents. So why it's significant that we've actually helped the families after somebody's passed away is we know for sure they work on the back end. Now, on the bottom of this, I let you know that we're a member of Wealth Counsel. Wealth Counsel is a group of about 3,000 attorneys nationwide, and we also collaborate on making sure that whatever we design for you works on the back end. And if another attorney's had something go wrong on a set of documents or a situation come up that somebody hasn't thought of before, we're able to make sure that our documents don't have that problem in the future. One of the things that I have in my trusts and in my wills is a standby special needs trust, and I'll mention that to you again later in the speech. But it's there for the just in case. So if somebody who inherits from you is disabled at the time they inherit, it's protective language. And the reason why I have it in there is another member of Wealth Counsel had a situation where it was needed and it wasn't there. So I learned from that other attorney having that experience what we need to add to our documents. So it's good to have somebody who actually collaborates with other attorneys. I'm a member of NALA, which is the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, and we collaborate both on the Medicaid and the veterans benefits. I have one other attorney that works for me at this time. Her name is Gretchen Benoken. She's actually was personally chosen by me and trained by me, and if you meet with her, it's the same as meeting with me. She's actually got more experience than I do. I think she's been practicing 30 years, something like that. But occasionally I have people call, they've seen a speech and they want to meet with me and it's hard to get in on my calendar. Gretchen can also meet with you and take care of things. Just recently, about 6 months ago, published my book, Who Gets Your Stuff When You Die, which is this speech is based on. When I first started talking to my publisher, he said, just record your speech, transcribe it. We can make a book out of that. So I recorded my speech, I transcribed it, I sent it to him, and he said, you got about 1/8 of a book. So I spent the next 2 years trying to come up with other stories that you guys would like to know, and came up with this book. I'm actually already in my mind starting to work on the second edition based on questions people ask at seminars like this. Your folders on the left-hand side, most of you have started already filling it out, but the sheet on the left, if you fill it out, what I do with that is I add you to my newsletter. So what you'll get is invitations to similar breakfasts like this. You'll also get, I usually do one legal article a month. So you'll get a legal article that kind of updates you on something that's going on law-wise. And then frequently I try to tell you one personal related story. It's becoming harder. My boys are now 16 and 18 and they have editorial rights. Because I used to be able to come up with something funny they'd done and tell you guys that story. But I embarrassed one of them with one of the stories I told, and so now I have to run it by them, is it okay to tell the story of what happened? So, in fact, I need to ask my oldest, I have a college story related to him, but I need to check with him and make sure it's okay to tell it before I tell you guys. So maybe that'll be coming up in an upcoming issue. But I don't try to inundate you with emails. Absolute most, you would get 3 emails a month from me. Somebody earlier asked, is it okay to come to more than one of these? I'm fine with that. And in fact, it sometimes takes people 3 or 4 times to get to the point where they really they're able to decide what they want to do as far as how they want things to go to their family. So it may be things I bring up, things you're thinking of. It may take you a while to get comfortable with what you're thinking of doing with your family or doing for your family through your plan, and I don't mind you coming over and over. All right, ground rules. 2 things. If you can hold questions to the end, that would be good, because a lot of times when somebody asks a question, it really literally is going to be 2 slides from now, 3 slides from now. I've also been at events where somebody just liked to talk, and so they would ask questions over and over through the whole speech, and it got distracting. So I like to hold questions till the end. If anybody needs a pen, I've got some. If you'll just write down what your question is so you don't forget, then we can ask that at the end. And then every event you're at tells you to turn off your cell phone. So if you guys will turn off your cell phones, or at least make them where they don't make noise, that'd be great. All right, who gets your stuff when you die? 14 secrets to protecting the 2 most important things in your life: everyone you love and everything you own. And the way I came up with this tagline is I was working with a business coach, and I talked to him about it. He said, I want you to figure out who your favorite client is. So if somebody asks you, who do you want to work with, you're able to communicate to them who the type of person you want to work with. And so I picked my top 5 people at that period of time that I really liked. When they came in the office, I was excited to see them. I enjoyed working with them. That's who I wanted to work with. And it took a while to figure out what they had in common, because 2 of the people were grandparents, and they had a large family, and they were wanting to make sure that what they left to their kids made it down to the grandkids. And 2 of the people were women who had never married and had no children. But they were very involved, and in fact, if I gave you their names, you'd know who they were, because they're very involved in the Denton community. And they've had buildings or schools named after them, but they love people, and people love being around them. And I know I told you 5, I don't remember what the 5th one was, but 5th one, so anyway, but what I thought about is what those people have in common is they love people. They want to do things for other people. They care about their family, or they care about other people around them. So I like working with people that love people. All right, let me go through. Distributing your stuff. Choosing who's going to get your stuff and helping them keep it. So when you meet with me, I'm going to ask you some nosy questions about the people you're leaving money to. I'm going to want to know where they work, if they're responsible with money, if their spouses are responsible with money, and if their kids are responsible with money. And when I'm asking you these questions, I'm looking for a lot of things. I'm looking for, do you like your daughter or son-in-law? Do you think your daughter and son-in-law would influence your child to spend the money in a way that you wouldn't approve of? Is anybody disabled, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a little bit. But one of the reasons why we need to get to know your family in order to design a plan is to make sure that what we put together will actually work with your family dynamics. I actually had a lady many years ago that came in, and she told me about her fairy tale son and the wonderful relationship that they had, and how they saw each other all the time. They got along great. Everything was beautiful. And then she got dementia, and when she got dementia, I met her real son. And her real son, she hadn't seen in 15 years. They hadn't spoken. He was mad at her. Her and her husband, which was his father, had gotten divorced, and he was mad at her over the divorce. So he hadn't spoken to her literally in 15 years. So this woman has dementia. She's paranoid, and the person that comes into town and starts making decisions on her behalf is someone she hasn't spoken to in 15 years. Now, this lady is also a prominent woman in Denton, knows a lot of people, and she was embarrassed and worried that if she told me the truth about her son, I might tell other people. So instead of telling me that and actually appointing one of her best friends, and she had many really good friends who would have taken care of her, we instead drew up all her documents to have this son she didn't trust in charge. They're still in litigation. It's been going on about 3 years now. So it's much, much better to trust the attorney you're working with enough to tell them about the real family. Now, I can honestly tell you that my fairy tale families where everything is beautiful and everybody gets along, I have 5 of them. I've been doing this for 20-something years. There's 5 of them, and I'm actually a little cynical because they haven't died yet. So the that lady probably would have counted as one of my 5. But very rarely when I actually start digging and we start talking through what's going on with your family, am I going to find a situation where everybody gets along beautifully, everything is fine. So don't be embarrassed if that's your story. Now, if you have one of my 5 fairy tales, I would love to add extra. So I'm fine if you have a good family, everything's good, everybody gets along. But the other thing to think of is death brings stress on the family, and I will have people in their 50s tell me the reason why they're mad at their sister is because their mom bought the sister a bike and not them, or bought their sister a nicer car than they bought them. So people will go back and resent things that happened a long time ago when something happens to their parents. So we got to somewhat think through that. The other thing is I've had 2 situations where somebody insisted upon putting 2 people that didn't like each other as co-trustees, and I was unable to talk them out of it. One of them was a man who worked all his life and he'd accumulated a pretty good sum of money, but he wanted to make sure that his daughter didn't blow it in a short period of time. And he didn't want his son to either, his daughter was more likely to spend the money. And so he left each of them $40,000. But he put them as co-trustees, so $40,000 per year. So $40,000 per year is what he wanted them to have for the rest of their lives. But he put them as co-trustees. And as soon as he passed away, they started fighting. And what he told me whenever we were setting up the plan, they fought their whole life. They've never been able to stand each other. But I'm going to put them both in charge because I want to teach them to get along. And they both are money driven. So if they figure out that it's going to cost them a whole bunch of money to fight, there's no way they're going to fight when I'm gone. Well, he was wrong. They immediately started fighting as soon as he was gone. And the one thing that was important to him, that the money last, that the money be given out over time, actually ended up not happening. Because when they had to settle in court, they actually settled to she was in charge of her money, he was in charge of his money, and she could take it out however she wanted. So if things are important to you, we need to think through, talk through what you want to put together. But the attorney really is going to draw up whatever you ask them to draw up. So if you're absolutely insistent they need to be together, the attorney will draw them up together, but warn you that maybe it's not a good idea long term. Handle with care stuff. What to do if a beneficiary is disabled. So if you're leaving money to anybody who's disabled, we need to talk about government benefits. And what we usually do is we create something called a special needs trust, or a supplemental needs trust, and they're actually the same thing, they just have 2 different names. That type of trust so that the money that you leave to that beneficiary is protected. It makes it where they can still qualify for whatever government benefits they qualify for, but the money's protected. But one of the things to think about when drawing up a trust like this is a lot of attorneys that don't know a lot about this area will draw it up so that the person that's disabled cannot get money that would disqualify them for government benefits. But sometimes that's the better thing to do, to let them have that money. Maybe the government benefit isn't going to take care of everything they need. So you could actually be unintentionally making this person live in poverty when they don't have to. So for example, for SSI, which is one of the disability-related programs, they're allowed to have about $735 a month. If you pay for housing or food, because that $735 is supposed to cover housing and food for this person. I know it's crazy. The number's too low, I know. What ends up happening if you start paying for that, it starts reducing the amount of their benefit. But the maximum it can reduce is 1/3. So they can lose about 1/3 of $735 if you pay for their housing and food. So in a lot of situations, it's kind of a why not? I mean, why not pay for their housing and food, give them a decent place to live, if you have a trust that you've got money that you have control of, and yes, it reduces the benefit. But we've got to watch, because if you reduce the benefit too far through that and other things, because it also gets reduced if they work, you could make them lose Medicaid, and Medicaid may be the only type of health insurance they're able to get, because a good portion of the people on SSI are actually disabled from birth, and so they're not going to be able to get on a government, or even under the Affordable Care Act, they're not going to be able to get health insurance. So it's something to look at. Just came back from a conference where we spent the entire week learning about how to make sure that we do these things properly. Mentioned this at the beginning, but I'm going to mention it one more time. We also do standby supplemental needs trust for just in case somebody becomes disabled, because we can't predict the future. And I'm fully aware, I like to meet with you, and I'll talk to you about that later, but I like to meet with you every 3 years and just see what's going on with your family and make sure that what we put together still works. But I'm fully aware that it's a depressing topic, and occasionally people see me, they create a plan, and they put it on the shelf, and they don't die till 30 years later. We've got to make sure it still works. So that's part of why it's in there. And then also, you just don't know what will happen in life. Stuff happens. Smart moves if you or your spouse are diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, or anything where everybody but you is going to become disabled. And I know that's a weird way to phrase it, but a lot of people that have a diagnosis like this, especially in the beginning, are in denial that it's actually going to affect them. So in the early stages, when you first get a diagnosis like this, we can do a lot of things to update your plan to make sure it works the way you want it to. So for instance, the way I have my plan set up, my husband and I are both in charge of our trust. In the event one of us becomes incompetent, then whoever's still competent is in charge. And then we've named somebody to be in charge if we're both unable to be in charge. So if somebody has a diagnosis like this, when they first come in, they can think through and pick who they want to have be in charge of their money. And like I said, probably all of you have the fairy tale families. But if you have any bad people in your life, that's who comes out of the woodwork when somebody needs to be in charge of your money. And there are people that will actually try to become in charge of your money that don't have your best interest at heart because they want access to the money. There are also people out of guilt who you don't necessarily have that good of a relationship with. For some reason, they'll feel like they're supposed to take care of you during that period of time. And you're probably not going to want those people to be the ones in charge. So if we plan ahead, we can actually name who's in charge. We can also name who's not in charge. But the other really important thing to do with somebody who has a diagnosis like this is most estate plans are what we call I love you wills. Husband leaves everything to wife, and wife leaves everything to husband. So whoever's left standing is in charge. And sometimes people die out of order. So sometimes the healthy spouse, the one that hasn't been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia, dies first. So that leaves the person with Alzheimer's or dementia in charge of the money. It also leaves that money vulnerable to Medicaid. So if they need to go in a nursing home, that money is vulnerable to Medicaid taking it. So it's worth adjusting and looking at the plan. Incapacity stuff. What if you're out of it? So what if you're unable to make your own decisions? Like I said, with a trust, we can name who's in charge of the money next. Without a trust, what happens is people go to court and they fight over who gets to be in charge of your money. And like I said, sometimes that goes badly. If there are people in your life that wouldn't do the right thing, those are the people that step in. It's also an extremely expensive and public process. So like the lady who I told you didn't want anybody to know that her and her son had a bad relationship, well, that's all public now because they're in a court battle, and if anybody's nosy, they can go down to the courthouse and get all that information. So if you don't have something in writing, you could have that happen. And then I have people tell me all the time, well, I haven't seen this person in 15 years, this son or daughter. That still is the person that sometimes will try to step up and come in. The court will also appoint an attorney to defend you if they're trying to get guardianship over you. And that attorney has a duty to diligently defend you even if they don't believe that the guardianship, that you are able to make decisions on your own. So it can become extremely expensive. I had a man that I actually represented, or I was the person appointed to represent him in a guardianship, and he actually believed that he had won the Jamaican lottery. And he was sending $200 to Jamaica, which wouldn't be all that bad except for the fact that he had short-term memory loss. He actually sent $200 to Jamaica 1,000 times. So he had lost $200,000. Now, when I tell you that, a lot of people think, well, he must have been somebody who wasn't all that smart prior to becoming incompetent. He was actually literally someone who had worked for a very large company negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts. And in his diminished mental capacity, he had decided that this thing with Jamaica was a multi-million-dollar contract that he was negotiating. And so when his family finally got him convinced that he had sent 200,000, he said, well, if I don't send them the next 500 that they've asked for, I'm going to lose the full 200,000, and I'm on the edge of negotiating this deal. Why would you not let me send the $500? Now, he had a power of attorney, so he'd named his son as power of attorney, which means his son would be able to handle his finances for him. When his son tried to take over the finances, he revoked the power of attorney. So occasionally people will say, oh, I don't need a trust, I can just use a power of attorney. But when you actually need to use the power of attorney, sometimes it gets revoked. And because a court hadn't declared him incompetent yet, he had the authority to revoke that. So if we have a trust instead with medical doctor letters, the son would have been able to come in and take care of the finances. Healthcare stuff. Who makes healthcare decisions for you if you can't? I had a lady many years ago came into my office. She said, my best friend is in the hospital unconscious. Her son, who she hasn't seen in forever, and all my stories have no good sons, but there are no good daughters out there too. These happen to be no good son stories. So the no good son is in town. He's trying to make medical decisions for her. I know she'd want me to make those decisions. Can we go to court and get me authority to make decisions for her? And the answer to that was no. At that stage, the neighbor was unconscious in the hospital. If she had beforehand come in and drawn up a healthcare power of attorney, she could have said, I want my neighbor to make those decisions. You can actually also draw up, in no event does my son get to make those decisions. So the neighbor could have come in and had the documents exactly how she wanted them, if that's how she wanted them. But if you don't do it ahead of time, there's not a way to do anything different. So it's actually, in some ways, more important than a lot of the other things I draw up, because you're still alive, you're in the hospital bed, who do you trust to make those decisions for you? The other thing that I talk through with people is, do you want to be kept alive on machines if doctors say that there's no hope? And about 90% of my clients will tell me, no, I do not want to be kept alive on machines. But what you mean by that and what I mean by that may be totally different. I have a lot of clients, as long as they can still communicate, as long as they can interact, or there's some chance of them recovering, they want to be kept alive on machines. I have several clients who are ICU nurses that tell me that they never want a feeding tube under any circumstance. But I have a client right now that's walking around with a feeding tube, and he's actually able to go to family events. I think I might be okay with a feeding tube then. Feeding tube in the bed, probably not. But I don't know until you get in the situation. So what I encourage my clients to do is actually have that depressing conversation with your family. What do you want? How do you want your family to make that decision? And that gives them peace of mind. You said you didn't want to be kept alive in this situation, or you said you did. Where's your line? What's the information? Now, in California, they actually have you, when you fill this out, you actually say yes or no to feeding tubes, yes or no to the antibiotics. You actually have a list of 20 things. But in the abstract, how do we know? Because I think I would have marked no to feeding tubes based on what I've been told, but this one person seemed to me like he was having decent quality of life, at least in that moment. So maybe it's okay. So have the conversation with your family so they know what you want. One other thing, difference between DNR and directive. DNR is what most people have at the point where you're in the hospital, usually you're terminal. Do not resuscitate means don't do any sort of extraordinary measures. What I have and what I do for my clients is called a directive to physicians. It says no life support after you've tried, after you've seen whether there's any hope or any ability to recover. So if I had a DNR, which I don't, if I had a DNR and I had a heart attack in the middle of this speech, and I had a bracelet or something that let the EMT know that I had a DNR, and you call 911, they're not supposed to do CPR on me. And so most of my clients, and I'll have really healthy people come in and tell me they want a DNR. Probably you don't. What you probably want is a directive saying after they've done the CPR, they've rushed me off to the hospital, they've put me on a ventilator, they've evaluated things, and they've said, listen, she's got brain damage, probably will never recover. Then you want life support removed. HIPAA stuff, privacy laws. Privacy laws, when you go to the doctor or hospital, you sign that you've read their privacy policy. Most of us don't read it, but they are all different. And the doctors really can say, the reason why the law came into effect is there were doctors selling your medical information. So they were selling the information that you had diabetes, and that's why you suddenly got all this diabetic drug information and all the different things in the mail. So you got put on a mailing list. Well, they were getting paid to do that. And so the reason why the law came into effect is they said, wait a minute, you shouldn't be selling people's medical information. But the doctor that you go to really could put on the form, I'm going to tell the drug manufacturers that you have this illness and I'm going to get paid to do it. It could be in the fine print of what you're signing. So you might want to look through it, just make sure that kind of thing isn't there when you read it. But the other thing that's bad about the law is there's not a set form. So every doctor, every hospital, because the penalties for breaking it is they could go to jail or pay huge fines, have actually hired somebody to design a form for them. And so they want to make sure it's signed. So I add language to the financial power of attorney and the medical power of attorney. Joaquin, it's a little bit cold. Can we warm it up just slightly? I told you guys the freezer story and then I started to freeze you. I'm sorry. All right, so privacy law. So what I add to my financial power of attorney and my medical power of attorney is language that says that whatever the doctor or hospital wants signed, your people that you want to have the information can sign it. So that way they have access to the medical information if they need to have that. The other thing that I do is when I have somebody in my trust named as co-trustees, or anybody steps in other than you as trustee, they need to sign a privacy authorization. And the reason why they do, I've actually got a situation like this right now. I've got a brother and sister who are co-trustees. The daughter believes the brother is starting to be incompetent, but the doctors will not talk to her about what's going on with him. And so if we have the privacy authorization, then she could actually look at the medical records and find out what's going on. And it would be the same way if son was appointed first and she was appointed second. She would need access to that information to decide whether she needs to step in. Because I don't know if you guys have been around people that have become incompetent, but it's not a bright line thing. So it's not one day you're perfectly competent, everything's good, and the next day you're drooling and you have to go somewhere, like to a mental institution. It's really a spectrum. And so based on that spectrum, you start making kind of bad decisions and people start worrying about you. And then eventually you get to the point where you're truly not able to make decisions. But a lot of times during that period of time from when we're perfectly competent to when we start making a few stupid decisions, people end up losing a whole lot of money. One of my clients recently, her dad was all proud. He had sold, they had 1,000 acres, and he sold the 1,000 acres for $400 an acre. And I pretty much don't even have to tell you where it is. $400 an acre is not enough money for the 1,000 acres. He thought it was in the 40s. And so, the 1940s. And so back in the 1940s, if you sold land for $400 an acre, he had made a deal. And he was really, really proud of it. But prior to that, they did not realize that Dad was making bad decisions. And there's no way to undo it because the person that bought it from him had no reason to know, other than he sold it crazy cheap, that he was not competent. And the person that bought it from him was a neighbor, and he really thought he sold it to him cheap because he wanted the neighbor to have it, so to preserve it as open land. So there was no way to undo it. So a lot of times it's hard to know. So if you could check on somebody or get the information, you're going to have a smoother transition. Who needs benefits? This is on Medicaid and veterans benefits. I actually give an hour speech on this. Usually we do it at least once a month. And the main thing I want to do with veterans and Medicaid, I'm going to give you guys kind of a high-level view so you know whether it's something you need to talk about or think about. Veterans benefits in particular, the type that we do is an improved pension. It's called aid and attendance. There's also one called housebound that we help with. It's really for the point where your medical expenses start exceeding your income, or when the net number from those two things is $2,000 or less is when it comes into play. So for most veterans, the time that we would start talking about this is if you need to move into memory care or assisted living, or you've started having to have somebody come to the house and take care of you. That's when it comes up. And a lot of times with this, we actually help improve the life and the life expectancy of the spouse at home that's taking care of the veteran who's ill. Because if we can get them an extra couple $1,000s a month, It makes a huge difference in the quality of life for that spouse. And I've actually had two women, and I'm sure there's a whole lot more out there, but I've had two women who were taking care of their husbands 24 hours a day with Alzheimer's that died first. And they were the healthier spouses. But if you have to take care of somebody 24 hours a day, and in some ways it's similar to when we had babies. When you have babies, you have to listen for them through the whole night to make sure they're not getting up. The same thing if you're taking care of a spouse in a situation like that. So both of these women were not getting enough sleep. So they were having to listen at night to make, because if their husbands got up, they would fall or hurt themselves, so they had to wake up at a moment's notice anytime the husband got up. And so they were so exhausted that both of them died from pneumonia. And so my point is, if we could get them an extra $2,000 a month and have some care help, we could make a huge difference in the quality of life. This veterans benefit also helps widows of spouses. Widows of veterans, and it also helps spouses of veterans. There's a portion of the benefit. And a lot of times people don't even know it's out there. The veteran has to have served 90 days in the military, 1 day during a defined period of war, and they can't have been dishonorably discharged. But other than that, as long as you have needs, so it doesn't have to be service-connected. They don't have to have gone out of the United States to serve. They serve during the right period of time, but it's worth looking at. Like I said, I'm not going to give you the whole thing. It's an hour speech. You guys don't want to stay here all day. Medicaid, the type of Medicaid we help with is skilled nursing. We also help with the type of Medicaid if you need skilled nursing but you're staying home. There's a way to get a certain amount of money at home. Those are the two types of Medicaid we work with. Medicaid covers a very broad range of things, but that's the types that we help with. With married couples, a lot of times what's important to the spouse at home is to make sure that that spouse has enough money to live on. So the very first lady that I helped with Medicaid, she had about $300,000. Her husband was going into skilled nursing, and under the current rules, she was allowed to keep about $100,000. She was living in independent living, and the cost of independent living for her, that was about 3 years worth of money, and then she was going to be broke. So what we were able to do, and there's some strategic language or some strategies we can use to make sure that the spouse at home is not totally impoverished. We were able to protect the full $300,000 so she had money to live on. He was taken care of in the nursing home. And so it's worth looking at almost no matter what. The other thing that we're running into more and more with Medicaid is people who think that they should slam dunk easily qualify are not qualifying. Our most recent one, the nursing home did a family a favor because the mother going into nursing home was totally broke. She had about $500 in her checking account. That's all the money in the world she had. They actually did the application for Medicaid for her, and 4 months later she got denied. And when she got denied, she'd actually accumulated 4 months worth of nursing home bills, which is about $24,000. The reason why she was denied is she had a burial policy, a whole life policy to be used for her burial, and it had about a $3,000 cash value. Well, under the rules, a single person's not allowed to have more than $2,000. Because she could pull the cash value out, she had $3,000. And the way Medicaid looks at things is on midnight of the first day of the month, if you have more than $2,000, you're absolutely disqualified for that month. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So when we finally figured out what was happening, she had lost those 4 months. Like there's absolutely no way to get her Medicaid for those 4 months. But once we saw her and was able to just have her pull out $1,000 in cash value and spend it, then she qualified. Now, government's never logical with stuff like this because it's like you got a $24,000 bill, you've only got $3,000. Surely we could say the first month you spend the $3,000 and then, or $1,000 and then you're qualified. Nope, you're disqualified for that period of time. So the family is trying to settle with the nursing home. They're going to pay a portion of the bill. But if they'd hired an expert to go in and look at it, they wouldn't have to be paying anything extra. So it's worth having an attorney look at it, even if you think they're going to slam dunk qualify, because we don't want to have that happen to people. And because it takes Medicaid 3 or 4 months to tell you yes or no, you're going to lose that period of eligibility. Single people, we can usually protect a good portion of what they have left when they go on Medicaid. So it's worth looking at. They're allowed to have $2,000, but they're allowed to do a lot of things. They're allowed to prepay their funeral. They're allowed to actually prepay a portion of a funeral for other family members. They can improve their house. They can buy a car. They can do a lot of things with the money. And one of the things to think through is, what are they going to need? Like, if they literally go on Medicaid and they're only given $60 a month, what other things would it be nice for them to have between now and when they die? So we might buy a wheelchair or a nice chair, or there's lots of things we might be able to do to improve their quality of life. But it's worth talking through, strategizing, seeing whether we can protect part of that. All right, protecting stuff after it's there. So whoever you leave your money to, do you want to protect that money if they get divorced or sued or have creditor problems? So we want to have it be in a protective wrapper to make sure that nothing goes bad with it. Other piece of the puzzle is, do you want to make sure that what you leave to your kids makes it down to the grandkids? Or to your brothers and sisters, that makes it to the nieces and nephews? Do you want to make sure that it makes it to the next generation? So like I said, one of the things I explore with you is, do you like the son and daughter-in-laws? But even if you do, you need to think through, if you leave money to your son and he dies before his wife, he's going to leave everything to her. And if she remarries, she's going to leave everything to the new husband, almost 100% of the time. So she may end up disinheriting your son's kids in the process. So a lot of my clients, when I talk through that, it's very important to them that it makes it down to the grandkids. 86% of men that lose a spouse remarry. I have people tell me all the time, there's no way I'm going to remarry if I lose my spouse. You don't know for sure. And you don't, especially your kids, they're younger, most likely in their lifetime their surviving spouse will remarry. And they might end up in disinheriting those kids. So that's one of the things I talk through with my clients. Important stuff, how to communicate your values to the next generation. I told you earlier on about the man who wanted his kids to have $40,000 a year for the rest of their lives. Some of my clients do that. They do some monthly amount or some annual amount to their kids. I've actually got one right now that every Christmas his kids and grandkids are going to get a present from him forever, because he wants them to remember him, and he's already kind of doing that with them. He's giving them a certain amount at Christmas every year, so they're going to continue to get money at Christmas every year as a way to kind of continue a tradition. What some of my clients do is they match the income that the people they leave money to make, because if you ask somebody, if you win $1 million or more in the lottery, the number one answer is that they're going to quit their job. It's what they're going to do next. Second answer is they're going to spend every dime of it. Inheritances are treated exactly like lottery winnings. So whatever you leave behind, it's about an 80 to 90% chance that every dime of that will be gone a year later, which is really sad to think about. You spend your whole life working for this money, and suddenly it gets spent in a short period of time. Now, I have a couple that's one of my clients that if you had asked me about 10 years ago to pick anybody out that I thought could handle inheriting $800,000 and not blowing it, I would have chosen this couple until they inherited $800,000. They came into me shortly after they inherited it. They were all excited about how they were going to be really practical with the money. They have 3 young kids. They were going to save for college. They were going to save for their retirement. They had spent their whole lives, they owned their own business, and they had been very, very frugal. And they had scrimped and saved and tried to get every penny out of what they could do, but they had really not been able to save for their kids' college or their retirement because they were barely making it. So when they inherited the money, they came to me and they said, okay, we're going to buy 2 relatively expensive cars, but other than that, we're going to save all of this $800,000. That's what our plan is. Can you guess how much was left a year later? None. Absolutely every dime of it's gone. And it's not in college savings plans, and it's not in retirement accounts. They spent the full $800,000. The other thing they did is they increased their lifestyle. Because you've got $800,000 to blow, you're going to start living like you've got lots of money. And so they actually probably are more broke now than they were prior to inheriting the $800,000. So some of my clients, like the man who did the $40,000 a year, he wanted to make sure that the money lasted. Some of my clients will say, okay, over 10 years we want the money to come out. That way, at least if it gets blown over a 10-year period and not a longer period of time. So think about, do you want to do something like that? Other thing is, do you want to maybe create a college fund for relatives? Or a trade school fund, like college or trade school, either one. Do you want the next generation to have the opportunities that would afford? And that's another thing that sometimes we can do as far as setting up a plan. Now, your retirement plans, I actually do another speech. I'm doing one next month that's an hour-long speech specifically on retirement plans and how we can put them into a trust to protect them. If we put it in a trust, then when it goes to a non-spouse beneficiary, you can protect it against the divorce, creditors, and lawsuits. So that's something to think about. But the retirement plans, I have a lot of clients that they see that as an opportunity to do one of two things. One, retirement plans, when they go to a non-spouse beneficiary, that person's going to be required to take out a minimum distribution or a certain amount per year. So some of my clients say, I like the idea of them just having a stream of income for the rest of their lives. So they can only take out the minimum distribution. So that money will last. Or anybody my age or younger, and actually probably a little bit older than me, but I'm 50, but anybody younger than me is not going to have a pension when they retire. So the companies we've worked for over the years, they're not going to have a pension out there. And if you talk to a financial advisor, the average person has not saved hardly anything for retirement. So people in their 50s, they'll look at how much they've saved for retirement, and it might be $100,000. So for the 20, 30 years we're going to be retired, somehow we're going to live on $100,000. So, or the average person is going to live on $100,000. So what a lot of my clients like with these retirement plans is, what if we have the family just, or the person you're leaving it to, just take slowly minimum distributions, and when they hit 60 or 65, then they can take the money out or do whatever they want. So you're providing a pension, or you're providing where they have money that can take care of them. Finding stuff and organizing stuff. If you hide money anywhere, write it down somewhere. 2 reasons. You get dementia or Alzheimer's, you're going to want to remember where it is. Others, when you pass away, how's the family going to know where it is? Also, if you have, people don't do this as much, but if you've been chasing higher CD rates, so you've got CDs in Oklahoma and Arkansas and here, let people know that. Because otherwise they're not going to know to look those places to find those. If you have a paid-up life insurance policy, meaning something you bought years and years ago and you don't get a premium notice anymore, those policies, 5% of those go unclaimed, and the reason why they go unclaimed is nobody knows they're out there. So let the family know that they're out there so they know where to find it. Or if you have anybody pass away, I have you search in unclaimed funds now, and you can just Google that, Texas unclaimed funds, and then 7 years later, you can look and see if they have anything, because that's how long it takes for money to go dormant. But that's a way to find assets that you might not know are out there. Second marriage stuff, how to protect your spouse and your kids. In a second marriage, if you don't specify how things go, your kids and your spouse end up co-owning them. And even if they get along great now and everything's beautiful, when somebody passes away, that relationship tends to change. And so we need to think through, talk through what needs to happen with that. Other thing that happens a lot is that your spouse in a second marriage is going to end up totally disinheriting your kids. Even if you think they have a beautiful relationship and everything's good, when you pass away, most likely your spouse's relationship with those kids is going to change. And so I have people come into me all the time after the husband dies. The wife will say, I loved his kids, that we got along great until he passed away, and now they don't come to see me anymore. And since they don't come to see me anymore, I'm not going to leave them anything. I'm going to leave it all to my kids. Now, sometimes when I tell that story to the husband's like, well, if they're jerks and they don't come to see her, then they don't deserve anything. And that's fine. We just got to make sure where you stand on that. But if you want to make extra sure it goes to your kids, we need to add some language. And the way I've got mine set up, I'm in a first marriage. We've been married 29 years. We've got the 2 boys together. I leave everything to James. He can spend anything he wants out of that money. But whatever's left of my money that went to him, it's going to go to our 2 boys. So if I die and James remarries, he can't leave my money to the new wife. He can leave his money to the new wife, but not mine. And I want to make sure whatever's left of my money goes to the 2 kids. And I like that. In the second marriage, I definitely like that kind of structure, but I even like it in the first marriage. Now, I have people come into me all the time. We've been married 50 years. If my spouse dies, there's absolutely no way we're going to get remarried. I have one client who was married 62 years. Wife passes away. He remarries within 3 months. I think part of it is he didn't know how to cook. But anyway, within 3 months, he remarries. They revised the plan where he ends up leaving. He's got 4 grown kids that are wonderful people. He's also got grandkids and great-grandkids that are wonderful people. He revises his plan where he's leaving a portion to the new wife. And then about a year later, he comes back in and he revises the plan to leave everything to the new wife. And she's a nice lady. I mean, but it really bothers me. If I was the one who died first, I'd want something to go to my kids. And in this situation, nothing is going to go to the kids when he passes away. So even if you think your spouse won't remarry, they might. Or you can teach them how to cook, and then maybe that won't be quite as much of a problem. Sentimental stuff. I used to talk to people a lot about people having conflict over the personal property. What I'm hearing more and more is that the moms and dads can't get the kids to take stuff. Because we're in such a mobile society, they don't really want stuff. But most likely there's going to be 1 or 2 items that they somehow associate with you that they're going to want, and that's what they tend to fight over. So it may be overall they don't want stuff, but the watch that you always wore or the necklace you always wore or something like that, when you ask the kids, what do you want, that's going to be the one thing that they all want. What I recommend to my clients is if you promise anything to anybody, write it down, sign it and date it. If you change your mind, write that down. If you decide to sell the watch or give it away, write that down. Because otherwise, the one who thought they were supposed to get it is never going to believe that you would have given away that treasured watch that was supposed to go to them. The other really sad thing is you need to have your house secured during the visitation and the funeral, because people will come in and steal things. I recently had somebody tell me a story where Grandma passed away. One of the kids, when it was time for the funeral, or grandkids, when it was time for the funeral, said, I'm feeling really, really sick, and I can't go to the funeral. I'm going to stay home. I'll guard the house. You guys go on to the funeral. They came home, and there was a U-Haul truck in front of the house. That granddaughter had literally loaded everything into the U-Haul truck. And apparently they came home a little faster than she thought they would come home. So I can tell you lots and lots of stories like that. Family members stealing things, other people stealing things. So you have to secure the house within a short period of time. But the other really important thing to remember with the sentimental stuff is if there's a story behind it that you want somebody to remember beyond you, write it down. Because I hear from daughters all the time when mom passes away, Mom told me the story behind the watch to the point where I was sick of hearing her tell it. But now that she's gone, I can't remember the details. So if you want it remembered beyond you, write it down. Other really important tip is don't write it in cursive. And you guys are laughing, you already know why. They're not teaching cursive anymore. And so based on that, you don't want it to be preserved, do that. All right, till we meet again, keeping the plan current and up to date. I meet with my clients every 3 years just to see what's going on. I include that in the price of what I do because I want to make sure that the plans that I design for you work on the back end. So if you do what I said, where you come into me, we design this plan, you stick it on the shelf, and you don't see me for 30 years, I've designed it where it's my best of my ability, it should work. But you're going to have circumstances, changes in your family that would make it much, much better if we look at it and make sure it's current. I can tell you lots and lots of stories of people I've had come in that 3-year meeting, and they said, Leigh, we're in here to say hi, we're going to visit a little bit, tell you about our travels, and then go on. We don't plan on making any changes. And when I start asking questions, I'll find out things like, I'll say, okay, now Joe, your son-in-law, is in charge in the event you pass away. And they're like, oh, he divorced our daughter, and we hate him. Why would we put him in charge? Or a daughter who's incompetent and shouldn't be in charge of her own money because she was in a car wreck or is irresponsible. Those kind of things. It really needs to be up to date, needs to be in place. The other thing that happens a lot, and part of why I do the emails that I do, I also do the seminars like this, I want to keep a relationship with my clients. I want to know what's going on with your family. So like I said, so it works on the back end. One of the other seminars that I do, I usually do it a couple times a year, is on what responsibilities do the people that are executors or trustees have. So what do they need to know? What do they need to be responsible for? And that's a way to get to know the people you're naming, so that way, sorry, that's slightly distracted. That way they know what their responsibilities are. They know what they're supposed to do at that point. All right, before we do questions, and part of what distracted me, my assistant Tammy is just outside the door. If you guys want to schedule an appointment, because occasionally I have 2 or 3 people walk up to me afterwards and want to schedule an appointment, she'll be able to do that for you after. And then what we're doing is if you do schedule an appointment today, we're giving you a free one of these books. Otherwise, they're $15 each. All right, so do you guys have any questions? The doctors have tests that they do related to incompetence. And so the doctor would do some sort of test to see if you know what year it is, who your family is, whether you can, I don't know why, but whether you can draw a face of a clock. Apparently that's one of the things that lets them know whether you're competent. Short-term memory loss, one of the ways they test it is they give you 3 words. And they actually say, I'm giving you these 3 words. I'm going to ask you what the 3 words are 30 minutes later and see if you can get them. I actually had a lady come in and she said, I went into the doctor and he gave me the 3 words. And then he talked to me about a whole bunch of other stuff, and I didn't hear a word he said because I kept thinking, I got to remember these 3 words. So she said, I didn't get the rest of the conversation. So that they have tests that they can do. The hardest thing with incompetence is it really isn't a bright line thing. It really isn't a one day you're competent, one day you're not kind of thing. So the hard thing is for a doctor to be able to step in, or you to be able to step in as a family member when somebody first gets incompetent. But it's a doctor's note is how it's worded within the trust.
So who would pursue these, if you say you don't have your spouse left, would your children go to the judge and say, I want my mom tested for incompetent? What gets the ball rolling?
Right. It kind of depends. If you have a trust in place, then they can actually, the kids could actually request that you go to the doctor and get a doctor's evaluation. If you're uncooperative and won't go to the doctor, then probably a judge has to get involved to make you go to the doctor to get that information. But most likely, if you're probably going to the doctor for a lot of things at that stage. And so if you've given your kids a privacy authorization, meaning they can look at your medical records and talk to the doctors, that's how they would get involved. And hopefully, when you create a trust, the people you name, the kids you name to be in charge, those are your good kids. Those are the ones that aren't going to step in and suddenly want you declared incompetent so that they can take over the money. So that's another reason why there's kind of a safeguard that way. You don't want somebody to be able to be in charge that wouldn't do the right thing. So you're going to want them to be able to step in. Now, some of my clients who start becoming incompetent, they realize they're starting to slip, and they're willing to voluntarily let their kids take over. Or voluntarily let their kids be maybe co-trustees, so there's kind of a second check on things. So just in case you think the Jamaican lottery is a good idea. Now, I'm amazed. I have 30 clients or 30 families that I represent who have been affected by something like the Jamaican lottery. So like you said, you think it can't happen to you, but it's amazing when people start losing their ability to make decisions, how quickly they fall for things like that. Yeah. But no, I've heard of that scam, and people fall for that. Now, the poor grandson that's actually in jail in Jamaica or in Canada and needs the gift cards is going to be really out of luck because most people know that you're not supposed to send the money. But it makes you wonder. One of my clients is really adventurous. She's traveled her whole life, but her husband passed away, and she started going to extremely exotic locations. And there was a scam thing. They tried to do that with her because they could see on her Facebook she was going dangerous places. But it was interesting because I thought, well, man, if she's actually ever in trouble and really, because I would send her $500 or $1,000 or whatever to get her out of jail, because she's one of those people that would definitely pay me back. And so what if she ever really is in jail? And actually, one of the last trips she went on, she was in a group of women who were 70 and above. 2 of them got arrested because their visas had expired, they'd just gotten confused as to what day they were leaving that country. And so they had actually put the wrong date on the visa by just one day. And they actually got arrested, and it was a Saturday. And in order to pay for their bail, it had to be in local currency. And nobody in the group had local currency. Anyway, it just ended up being this huge nightmare. So anyway, so every once in a while I wonder, like, what if you legitimately needed money for something like that? There wouldn't be a way for people to believe you because of the scam. But yeah, people fall for that. One of my relatives, she lived out in the country, and there had been a hailstorm, and a roofer shows up. And my mother always handled all her stuff like that. And she figured since she lived out in the country, the roofer had to be, my mom sent him, because otherwise why would a roofer just randomly appear? And she gave that guy a check for $7,000. And all she knew was the name on the check and the general description of what he looked like. And no way, I'm like, she didn't remember, it was in a truck, but like what brand of truck, anything else. So people get vulnerable, they fall for things, but the scams out there are hard. So what other questions do you guys have? Do you have anything else?
You have the trust and everything's being divided between all your children, and one child dies, does that child's children inherit their part, or does it just go to you?
It depends on how it's worded. Most of the time, the way I draw things up, it goes to if a child dies, their portion would go down to their children. Every once in a while, I'll run into somebody who really just wants to leave it to the 4 kids. And so if a kid's gone, they want to leave it to the other 3. A lot of times, that somewhat has to do with just not being able to imagine not outliving the kids. So you're looking at current. So every once in a while, maybe 5% of the time, I'll have somebody just do it equal among whatever kids survive. But most of the time it goes to the other. But that's another reason why to meet every 3 years and talk, because if you haven't really thought through if that child died, where you want it to go, you might change your mind. Now, I do have one that I just did where the child passed away. I think he's been gone 15 years now, and the grandmother has no relationship with those grandchildren. They ended up going with the mother, and the mother didn't let her see him or something. But anyway, she doesn't have a relationship with them. So she actually really literally doesn't want to leave anything to those grandkids. So that's why, yes, in the boilerplate or how we put it together, we have it worded a certain way, but we want to make sure it does what you actually want it to do. Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that both people have to agree on things, or one or the other?
If you name somebody as co-trustee or co-power of attorney, we can word it where they have to act together, or we can word it where they can act independently. But the brother and sister that I mentioned that weren't getting along, the acting independently would be dangerous, because I mean, they're going to be acting differently and independently, and that's going to cause a problem. If we made it where they had to agree, which is actually how this language was, still doesn't work. So, but it's thinking through what do you want, because sometimes you want it to be 2, and those 2 people live in different states and may not be around, where you really do want one of them to be able to do things for you, or the other, and you don't care which.
If you set up a trust, is there a certain time period in Texas where you have to wait, maybe it's 5 years or 7 years before it starts going into, say, a nursing home, and you get that 100,000 that you're allowed to keep, but not the 300,000 that you have?
I heard all the words, but I'm trying to say. Tell me one more time.
So we're from Massachusetts, and I was working in long-term care. And when our new clients would come in, our business office person would sit down with them and say, okay, in the state of Massachusetts, you are allowed to have 115,000.
Okay, I got it now. I got it now. For Medicaid, there's a 5-year look back. So we do part of why, and I don't think I mentioned it, but when we do, if somebody's diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia, something where you might end up in the nursing home someday, especially if your spouse who's taking care of you dies, you might end up in the nursing home. we do something called 5-year planning. And with 5-year planning for Medicaid purposes, we can protect any amount of money. Because any amount of money you can give into a trust that protects it, and that money, Medicaid doesn't count. Now, one of the things that I insist on doing with my clients with that is you can't just give that money to the kids and trust the kids to do the right thing. My most recent fairy tale family that fell apart, I had a lady give $500,000 to her son and daughter-in-law, but she wrote the check to the son and daughter-in-law. Gave $500,000. They'd been married 30 years, great people. They had grown kids that were great people. So when I told her, like, well, if your son dies, she said, I have no doubt my daughter-in-law will do the right thing. I said, okay, well, if they die, will the grandkids do the right thing? Yep, definitely would do the right thing. They're good people. Well, the wife met the man of her dreams, and she left the son. So the daughter-in-law did. And she said, listen, I'm going to go start my new life with my $250,000 because your mom gave me $250,000 and you $250,000, and she's gone with that $250,000. So even if you have the fairy tale family, I'm just going to tell you, nope, we're not going to trust that everything's going to stay beautiful, because it doesn't always. And I actually, because Denton's small enough, I actually know all the players in the game, and I probably would have thought the same thing prior to her being swept off her feet by this new person. So I would have trusted her to do the right thing. I would have trusted the grandkids to do the right thing. They didn't end up doing the right thing. So, and I can tell you lots of other stories. Most of the other stories I know, I had some suspicion they might not do the right thing. This one I did not. But I make them put it in a trust so that they remember it's your money. Money gets protected. They do, but there's some strategies we can use to protect it. So the answer used to be 100% yes. The rules now, we can switch it into an annuity and we can have it protected. Now, all the income from that annuity is going to go to pay for your nursing care. So you're not going to necessarily, what would be left is whatever's left when you die, is what it ends up being. But there's some strategies now that we can protect retirement plans. You don't have to pull it all out. If we're trying to do the 5-year planning, we can't do any 5-year planning where we don't pay income tax on that money. So that we still have that. But if it becomes in what they call paying status, where you get a certain amount a month off the retirement plans, then it doesn't count against you. And there's some exceptions to retirement plans. If you have a major medical need, which you would if you had to go in the nursing home, there's a way to get that money out without a penalty. You still pay income tax, but you don't pay a penalty on it. I have financial advisors that I would send you to, that I trust to give you good advice. Okay. Yes?
You had said that if something happened with you and your husband, an example, how do you determine what was your money if you passed away and we were to remarry? What determines what was yours?
And what it says. What happens with us, because we've been married since we were 21, everything we have is ours. Most of it. Each of us have inherited a little bit of money along the way. So pretty much everything we have, because it's community, would get divided in half. The small amounts that we've inherited along the way, actually, we haven't done a good job of keeping them separate, but if we've done a good job of keeping them separate, then those would go, like, if I had inherited it, would stay on my side. So the things that stay on my side are things that are separate property. So anything I inherited, anything I brought into the marriage, and anything that was given to me during the marriage. So if my mom gave me money, that would be my separate. Everything else is community. And then that's kind of a bright line on the day I die. We create a trust for James for my half of everything. So everything we have would split into 2 buckets. And there would be a name on the account. It would actually be called a marital trust. There'd be a marital trust with my assets in it that he's in charge of. Now, the way I have my plan put together, I'm assuming that James will still be a good guy and that he'll take my money and use it for anything he needs. But whatever's left is going to go to our kids. Now, if I thought that he wasn't going to take care of our kids, or if I thought the woman he married wasn't going to take care of our kids, then I might switch and have somebody else be in charge. So some of my clients, especially the ones that are older, they have some concern that if the spouse does remarry like that one man did, that the new spouse might influence him to spend every dime. Because the way I have mine set up, James does have authority to spend every dime I've left him on himself or our kids or even his new wife. So I'm not putting that much restriction on it. It's more kind of an honor pact between the two of us, but we have a document that says what I want. But like I said, if I really wanted to make 100% sure my kids got something, I would put somebody else in charge. Now the downside on that when you're trying to draw up a plan is you might think that's great for your husband, but it also goes the other way. So he dies first, I suddenly have somebody else in charge of half the money. Am I okay with that? So it's a conversation to look at. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. And if you fill out those sheets, I'll just add you to my mailing list. And like I said, if you want to make an appointment, Tammy's in the back, or Tammy's the person in a white sweater just outside the door. What I charge is, it takes an hour to an hour and a half. What I charge is $350, and that goes towards whatever you hire me to do. So very rarely do I have somebody come in and pay me the $350 and then not hire me to do something else. At the end of the meeting, I actually quote you flat fees based on what we've discussed. What I've found over the years, I have people ask me how much do I charge for this or that. If I give you a range, it's such a broad range that it's not an informative conversation. But at the end of the conversation, when I know what you actually want to set up, then I can quote you fees that actually make sense based on what we're doing. And what I've found over the years, too, is a lot of times when people call up, they'll say, I just need to know what a simple will costs. Very rarely when somebody asks that do they really have a simple situation. And so it's based on the complexity of your family, how much protection you want to put for your family. Those kind of things are what factors into what the price is for the different packages. Well, thank you guys for coming.